Hi, I'm Paul Arnold. I'm a qualified psychotherapist and also a trained coach. Today I thought I'd talk about whether AI is going to replace therapists, because there's a lot of talk about how AI is going to change everything in the world. Look, the short answer is yes and no. So let's dig into a bit of this. Look, there's been a massive rise in tech-based apps, Calm, Happy, I Am Sober, etc. A whole range of them. And there's also been, online low-cost sort of therapy like BetterHelp. And the latest new things that's coming along are these AI chat box therapies like Wiser. Look, the benefits are, they're incredibly cheap. I think Wiser is about £69 a year. Well, that's like very often less than one therapy session. And it's fast. There's no waiting time. With the NHS, sometimes up to 18 months, you can get your issue sorted out now. And also, the other advantage over, in-room therapy is 24/7. Any point in time, you can go online and you can have the conversation. So that's a real powerful benefit for that stuff. And it clearly fills a massive space, with the complete lack of NHS funding. I was reading something the other day that in April 2024 alone, 426,000 mental health referrals were made to the National Health Service. That's a 40% increase in 5 years. And with the massive rise in sort of mental health issues, the National Health Service is failing to be able to keep track with everything. So it is going to be outside sources that's going to do it. And not everyone has got the money, let's be quite frank, Other benefits are, for what I call sort of low-level livable issues, it's definitely something. It's definitely worthwhile exploring some of these other, tech-based apps, and for less complex issues, it does really help. So maybe someone who's got a little bit of sort of anxiety, or stress, it can definitely work with that. And it's really good for giving strategies, boxing, breathing techniques, or, a little bit of mindfulness, it's really good at that. And obviously many of the CBT things, like what are the trigger points, what's alternative strategies, it can really work there. And so right now, I don't think I'd want to be a CBT therapist, because if that is the modality that CBT works, and actually where the pressure of the NHS is, I could well see that the NHS is going to be pushing much more into AI-based sources than using CBT therapists, because it's a way of, dealing with a lot of issues. And as we know, the NHS has favoured a CBT approach. So I definitely see there to be a massive space, and a rightful space, for tech-based apps, But will it replace real sort of, people-to-people therapy? The answer is no, it's never going to replace that. It will be an adjunct, and people may decide to use both. And there are three key reasons for this. One is because it's about relationship, two is about emotional healing, and three is about unconscious patterns. So let's explore each one of those. The first one is, as Yalom said, it's the relationship that heals. We know that from all the empirical research, and it's all in that book tucked away inside there, that basically the evidence shows that one of the most powerful contributors to therapeutic success is in the quality of the relationship between the client and the therapist. Because it's in that space where we're holding them, we're working with them, we are witnessing them, we are doing all the work that very often relationally they never had in the first place, is where a lot of the therapeutic, work actually comes about. The second thing is, I'll call it emotional healing. Look, chatbots, etc., are really going to be working in a different modality from the way that therapy works. It's very much a cognitive-based space. And what we know is that people's issues, by and large, come from deep emotional disturbances, very often very early on in their life. And so a lot of the repair has to happen in the same emotional space. And I often say that what we're doing in the therapy is we're creating a safe space for them to express out that emotional hurt. And to find that actually, rather than avoiding it, they need to come through the emotion to really deal with the underlying problems they're dealing with. And often, what we're also doing in that therapy room is we are doing what I'll call affect regulation. We're helping to make them feel they can be calmed by the presence of us in the room. And then, very often, because actually the way it works, we're working in a very sort of, cognitive space. If you think what goes on with chat boxes, you're writing something down. That automatically takes you into a headspace, and then it responds back and you read it. And that again keeps you in a very headspace. And the reality is that, how often have you been able to rationalize away a feeling? It doesn't work. We've got to go to the feeling space, and that's more difficult if you're using AI. Then I want to now talk about unconscious patterns. To go back to this thing about, what we're doing is we're only using, words. And a good piece of research done years ago by a man called Alfred Mehrabian showed that, only 7% of communication comes from words, 38% come from tonality, and 55% comes from non-verbal communication, our body language. So consequently, if we're only relying upon words, particularly that words will be edited and will say what we want to say, we're not really getting to the heart of the issue. When you're in a therapy room, we are reading everything. We are picking up on that nuance. We're picking up on maybe what you didn't say. We're picking up on your body language. And it's often through those little cracks that we actually get to see what really is going on in that space. And I always say, silence is never silent. It's communicating massively. And the other thing is what often goes on in the therapy room is we are recreating past patterns of relationship in that space. And what we're often doing is we are then playing back, we're feeding back the impact that person is having upon us, which again, of course, chatbots can't get anywhere near. So net is, yes, they are a very powerful, useful adjunct, but dealing with the bigger, more complex problems, I really think that there is no way that basically it's going to replace fundamental person-to-person therapy. This is good news because actually it means that for many people who can't afford this stuff or need constant help, these apps are a really powerful space. But I actually think it's the one of not or, it's the case of and. Anyway, I hope that helped.